Kumlen and Ablat Gemara. Today's daf is daf Yud Aleph, and we're up to the bottom of the page of Yud on the base, and so we're up to actually a few. Say we're up to. Right, we're finishing discussing. We were discussing Lot, how he separated from Avram, and because of he did not do he did it not l'shem shemaim, having relations with his daughters, and therefore all the males of Moav and Ammon are forbidden, and his daughters did it l'shem shemaim, thinking that the world, is extinct, and therefore they want to perpetuate the human race. Says the Gemara here, comparing our 10 lines from the bottom, the middle line. Amru Ula says, Tamar. On the other hand, Tamar, who seduced Yehuda without Yehuda realizing who she was, Zonsa and Zimri Zina. So you have two people in the Torah that had intimacy out of marriage. One was Tamar, and one was Zimri. And yet Tamar Zonsa, when Tamar's Mizana Yotzim Imena Melachim Unavim, who her descendants, when Davina based on the bottom. Malka Beis David and Nevim. Zimri Zina Naflu Kamer. So 24,000 Eden were killed because of Zimri, in account of Zimri. Amar Nachman Yitzchak. We had the same Gemara in Nazir. About 10 lines on the bottom of the page. Rachel said, "Kedei la'aveda l'shma v'mitzvah shel l'shma. L'aveda l'shma is greater than the mitzvah shel l'shma. And aveda l'shma. How do we know that? Shenemar, because it says in Pasuk, Tevaydech menoshim, who should be blessed more than any other woman, is Yoel, Eishes Chaver HaKeni. Now, what exactly did she do, Yoel? Menoshim ba'oil, more than the women in the oil in the tent. Now, what she did was she seduced Sisera. She had relations with Sisera, weakened him, and then she took the peg and bore a hole in his head and killed him and saved Klal Yisrael. Who are these women we're comparing to Yael? Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Now, she was Mizana, but she did it l'shem shamayim. They have relations with their husbands, even though they did l'shem shamayim to Mimoyle Shvatim Shem Mitzvah, but they also had pleasure at the same time. That's what Rashi says over here, and the Shains are here. Rashi in the other place says more than Sarif Karchalei, because they brought their shvachas to Yaakov, and that really wasn't a mitzvah, it's not their mitzvah, and therefore it wasn't not as great as Yal. Whatever she did l'shem shamayim. It's not so. What you're telling me about that Aveda Lishma is greater than Mitzvah Shalei Lishma, and you're downplaying a Mitzvah Shalei Lishma. We learned it in other places. Person should learn. Tell you that mitzvahs, even Lishma, eventually bring you to Lishma, which means that the Lishma goof is all right. Amy, right. Let me amend. Mitzvah Shalei Lishma, it's equal. And Aveda Lishma is equal to Mitzvah Shalei Lishma. That hour, sister had 7 times intimacy with Shalem. It says, how do you know 7 times? Because the pasuk it talks about bowing down and kneeling and all that. It says 7 different times the word Bein Agleh, Kara, Nofal, and Shachav, and it says again Kara, Nofal, Kara, and Nofal. So therefore, a total of 7 times. Welcome, Miss Hanya Ma'aveda. She had Hanor. How can you say that there's only l'shem shemayim she benefited? Even something that generally is pleasurable, but if it comes from a Rasha, she was a tzaddik. She was Nashim Sikonis, and it was a terrible thing. This is what we said before. You should do Lishma. How do we know that? Balak brought 42 kabbanas. How do we know that? He built 7 altars, 7 mizbeches, and each one he brought a pot and an aisle. He brought 2 kabbanas on each one 7 times. That's 14 and 3, and he did it 3 times. So therefore 42. And he said, I did more than Abraham. Zocha the Yatzim and Rus, and his descendant is Rus. How do I know that? Rus, who was Rus? Rus was Bas Benoy Shel Eglei Melech Moav. She was a granddaughter of Eglei Melech Moav, who was Ben Benoy Shel Balak Melech Moav, and Eglei was a grandson of Balak. So ultimately, she was a descendant of son of Balak. How do the Abish doesn't withhold even this char of when you talk? If you say the right thing, from here, the older daughter, the Karya Mayav, the older daughter, called her son, it said Mayav. No, where's the name Mayav come from? Me'av. So she was brazen about it. She was bragging that she had from Mayav. I'll touch his Moav. So what do you say about Moav? I'll touch his Moav. Don't wage a war against them. You don't have to be nice to them. Milchama who delay. So you think you can inside him. The younger daughter, Dekaria Ben Ami, she didn't call her son, related back to her father. She just said Ben Ami, much more discreet. Amalei said, Al Tetzurim, Al Tizgabam Klal. You should have nothing to do with them. Not just don't wage a war, but Klal, don't hassle them. I feel to the Moshe Feinstein's Chuvas, in the beginning, he has in the later Chuvas, he has a Agdoma to a Sefer. Tells a remarkable story, which is Bekitzer, about a woman who had a dibuk and all that, about a person who had a dibuk and they had terrible chalemus. It turned out to be that this Rav was said terrible things about the daughters of light. And he had a dream that the reason why the older one called her Moyav, Ma'av, not because she was brazen, and actually you'll see from the Gemara in a minute, not because she was brazen, she wanted to tell the world there's no such thing as immaculate conception. Because otherwise people would say, how did you have a child? It must be another god. It must be immaculate conception. She says, no such thing. May of, there's a person involved. And in other words, she did L'Shem Shemayim. That's all part of the L'Shem Shemayim in this covenant, including the name. And you know how you know that? Even though it doesn't bring that in the story, from the next Gemara here. So the way our Gemara reads is that the older one was no good. Moya was no good. It's Amoin who's tzniyazik and discreet and everything else. Even though the Shem Shemayim, but she kept it, to a minimum. But yet the next Gemara says, who got more schar? The older one. Because of the older one, jumped in ahead to try to do the mitzvah as soon as possible. That Derus, David HaMelech, was before the Chavam, 4 generations. So the Gemara is complimenting her for jumping ahead of mitzvah. So that means everything she did was L'Shem Shemayim, including Yemoyah, like that story there. Fascinating story. Tell me what we learned. Now we get all the halacha. It says in the pasuk, Ma'am ha'oretz. You should bring without Yud Aleph from it. Aleph, you said abroad. Ma'am ha'oretz. They should bring a carbon. If a person sinned, you should bring who's the person. Ma'am ha'oretz. Prat l'mashik. It comes to exclude who. So it says me'am, not everybody. From the people. I mean, some people are not. Who are excluded? We'll learn 3 people are excluded. Number 1 is l'mashiach kain gadol. Me'am aret prat l'nasi. Number 2 is excluding the nasi. Now the obvious question is, you need a pasuk to exclude them. The Torah already clearly said that a kohen mashiach brings a par for his avedis. A nasi brings a male goat, while everybody else brings a sheep or a female goat. So what do you need a limud me'am aret say the different? I would have thought Mashiach al Helem. So this the Bryce says. I would have thought that like this: a kohen god. Remember, when the kohen god bring a carbon, he has to paskin first out of mutter, and then he goes ahead and he doesn't have Heda. So I would have thought if he does that, he brings a special carbon that he's supposed to bring. What happens? He didn't paskin; he just stamina like everybody else. Then maybe he's no different than everybody else. He should bring a carbon chatas like everybody else. That's what you'd have thought. Therefore, the Torah say ma'ama oretz to tell you that no. That a normal chata does not apply to a kohen gadol, and then the Braisa said the same thing applies to a nasi. And the Gemara is going to try to understand where's the nasi come in. So the Gemara, I would have thought Mashiach al helm dabrim yugagim ma'isa, maybe part of yugagim ma'isa l'chude, maybe kid musira, but if he does the aveda, maybe he's like everybody else. Tamalei ma'amar is prat l'Mashiach. Prat l'nasi. The Gemara asks, what's the Braisa telling you about nasi? Why do we need the question? My nasi still remains, since the Torah clearly excludes a nasi has a different carbon. What do you need ma'amar to tell you that a nasi is different? We raised it's before in the Torah. Mashiach, Teinach, Mashiach, Nasi, Mashiach is Maisi the Maisi. What would you have thought? When does he bring a carbon? Only when he does a shayk like everybody else. And the Torah says, what's his carbon? A sayir. He brings a male goat. So what do you need Ma'amah to tell you that he's different than everybody else? A unique case. What happens? He ate a kazayis chayla when he was a hedyet, and then he became a nasi, he became the melech, and then afterwards he found out he made a mistake. So I would have thought, okay, in this case, since you did the aveda when you were a hedyet, he should still bring a carbon like a hedyet. That's what it says, me'ama. Not every person brings a carbon. For example, in this case, since you didn't find out till you became a king. So I never thought, nice, because that's what he did the Veda. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Hitaka does. Remember, the Chachamim said, we focus on the time you did the Aveda. Since he did the Aveda when he was a Hedyet, even though now he's a Melech, he does bring a carbon. No, but Rav Shimon said he had to find out while he was still a Hedyet. If he didn't find out until he's a Melech, he doesn't bring any carbon. Not as a Hedyet, because he found that, because you need 2 things, the Aveda and the Yediyah. Since the Aveda was when he was an ordinary person, and the Yediyah was when he became a Melech, so he brings no carbon, which carbon fits in here. But honey Rab Shimon, I understand. The Oswald Basi Yediyah, so therefore he doesn't bring any carbon. El Rabbanon, and that's what the pasuk is Ma'amoritz. El Rabbanon does it, Rabbanon says, "Taka does bring a carbon then, like everybody else." So Michael remember. So what's the pasuk Me'amoritz coming to exclude? El Razim Mashin Drachim Meskin. What talking about here? Okay, what happens? Sha'achal Chatzi Kazai is Chele Kishu He ate a half of his eyes when he's a hedyot. Then this man became a king. Vehishlima, and he ate the other half as a melech. So the question is, does he have now? Do we look at the first half, or what Rashi says actually could it be the second half as well, or we look at the second half, or nothing because he did only a half of his eyes in each stage. In other words,
in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, Kiddush Pras has to be Kiddush Pras. Yeah, they told him Milk King he's having eating this meal over there. Yeah. So
Because by Megillah, there's no time limit.
Yeah, but by eating there is.
Say okay.
What do you mean?
I Megillah.
Yeah, but it's Moed Haggis.
Now and
Yeah, but the Aved is not the eating. Aved is using stealing. Yeah. Okay. So half of his eyes now. The Achach Noidulay. Saga would have thought instead of I should combine the two. And either now when the Gemara says that we treat him like an hedyot, the Gemara could have just as well said maybe Jerk Melech. That's a separate Chakira. But we would have thought he should be Chayiv because now he's actually doing the Aveda. It's not just he did the Aveda before, he now knows now. Kamashlan, that no. In other words, the question is when a person becomes a king, is he a different person or is he really the same person, but he has extra responsibilities? So we would have thought that he's the same person with extra responsibilities. So he ate a half now, I had before, combine them. Kamasha, no. When he becomes a melech, he's a different person altogether. But when he's deposed, he goes back. Now that we're talking about these things, I have an interesting question. This is, let's say you're a melech, like this. Try to picture this thing here. You're middle of eating over there, chaylev, a little bit of chaylev, you have great news. You just became the king. And he continues, and he's about to continue eating, and right before he puts the next bite in his mouth, a minute later, it has to be holding less than 4 minutes, they tell him, you just deposed. Somebody else just took over the king. It's over. So in between the two half of Kazesim, he became a king. So is that king mafsik or not? Or not? Ma'u shetafsik. What going to happen? Because he didn't have a guy when he was an ordinary person. Then he was appointed a king, and then he disposed of him, all within the Techel Pras. The world moves very fast. But he shliba, and then he ate all that. I guess by deciding he continued eating.
We lost the kingdom.
So we say. Doesn't combine the Achle Palga because you had your Palga. In the previous case, he ate half when he was a hedyot, half when he was a nasi. It's a different person. Here he ate when he was a hedyot, and he ate the second half when he was a hedyot. They combined. Or maybe it's a different previous case because there was a hefsek in between. Therefore, we don't connect the two parts. Says the Gemara, let's be patient for the following thing, which we had in Sanhedrin, another place that once you rejected, you're rejected. You ate fat by mistake, the hefrish carbon, and you decide to set aside a carbon, and then the you became a mummer, and a mummer cannot bring a carbon. As well, saying about a mummer doesn't bring a carbon. And then, so that means the carbon was nitcha. And then the chazba, you did tshuva. So the question is, can you not bring the early carbon? And we say, once he's rejected, he's rejected. Maybe something here. Once he became a king, he's no longer shaykh to whatever happened before. So of course, even though afterwards, a minute later, he's no longer king, it wants give us nitcha. What are you comparing? Mummer, during the stage when he was a mummer, when he was a spiteful person or habitual aveda, you don't bring any carbon you bring, we don't accept. Okay, therefore, it's rejected. Hi, carbon. As a king, he also brings kabbanis. Now, that's a different carbon, but he's still chayiv kabbanis. So therefore, as a king, there's a suffix. What we do there, whether he combines or not. So who said it's considered? It's like a rejection. A rejection is there's a period that you couldn't bring the carbon. There, as a king, he's still chayiv kabbanis. So it's not considered a rejection. That's my question. Is since he's chayiv kabbanis and now he's no longer king, do we combine the two halves or not? What happened to Osham Toli? He ate chayla. It was a suffix whether it was trade fats or not. While he was a hedyot. So what would it then be? Bring Osham Toli. Then Yismani became a king. He became a king. A king still brings a noshim toli, but he's a different person. Remember, a kohen gadol does not bring a noshim toli because it says twice the word shegi. Only those who, when they do a shegi, they bring a carbon. But if you do a shegi, you don't bring a carbon unless you paskin, beforehand that it's mutter. That's a different category. So what happens here? When Ismani became a king, and he found out that there's something mal. According to Rabban, say you look at the time that he sinned. Like to Bailach. Well, no question. He sinned at the time when he had to bring noshim toli. The ma'is noshim toli. So even though now he's a king, he brings Lashon Toli. According to Rab Shimon said that you had to find out at the same while you were still a hedyot. You did a later you had you found out you had you, then you bring a carbon. But if you found that later, because you need two parts to bring a carbon. Midishtani levadi ishtani. So we say since it comes to avada carbon, chatas, he no longer, if he found out only after he became a king, he no longer brings a different person. So therefore, maybe also Gan Toli is a different person. Therefore, the deed did not happen at the same stage of his life. Ideal Maki Dishtani levada. He only changes the different person when it comes to carbon chat because the Torah said clearly he has different kabbanas. Aber the carbon chatas, aber the shtani carbon day. Because the Torah says the carbon changes. The fact is, the Torah nowhere said that he doesn't bring an Asham Toli. He still brings the same Asham Toli everybody else if he sinned while he was a king. He should bring the Asham Toli. Teiku. Torah we learn. Ma'amad is a third thing that we exclude. Prat lemumer. Not everybody. We won't accept the kabbanas from a mumer. According to the Tanakama, Rab Shimon agrees, but from a different limit. Rab Shimon, it says in the pasuk, if he did an aveda that he shouldn't have done, bishgoga v'ashim, and he's guilty. Hashav he does, but he did it b'shegi. In other words, had he known, he wouldn't have done it. So Hashav if you would have done tshuva had you known, then maybe carbon. You're a mummer. You care. Even if you did a mistake, if you knew that it was mamash treif, you care, you still would do it. Then ain't made a carbon another gosse. Then he doesn't bring a carbon. My benai, what's the where you learned the Rasha from?
But what's
He didn't know that was Chaylev. He thought it was Shuman.
He would have been in there anyway.
But he's still a shaygig. Just he's not a shav midiyasa. He wouldn't have done tshuva. Exactly. Yeah. So my benai, what's the difference where you learned it from? A big difference. Maybe karmel adam. He's a habitual eater of chaylev, but not when it comes to dam. He has a taiva for chaylev. The one who learns ma'amah, is a mummer, is a mummer. Establish a mummer, no kabbanis. But the guys know that Rab Shimon, Rabbi Shimon Yasi said the word is whether you do tshuva. Well, if he knew it was dam, he would not have eaten it. He would have done tshuva. So therefore, he brings the carbon. The dam yeshav midiyasu. Said but it can't be because Rav at least paskin the kulei have mummer dam. Everyone agrees. If you're a mummer to one thing, you're only a mummer to that thing. You're not a mummer to call unless you're mechal Shabbos or even the Zara, and that's it. We're talking about somebody eats in the vela because it's geschmack. If there be kosher food, he might have eaten kosher. There's no kosher, he'll eat treif because he likes it, not because he's spiteful, not because he wants to show he doesn't care about the Torah. When his chalav lebishim, what happened was b'shaygig, he thought he was eating treif fats. It turned to be his kosher fats. So he wants to bring a carbon. Now, how do we treat this guy? That's a machlekes. Habitually, he'll eat treif. Not because of spite, because he likes it. But it'll be kosher, he eats kosher, doesn't care. Then mumuru, I still call him a mumur. Since if he would have found heter, he wouldn't spite eat treif. Then he's not called a mumur. Similar to Sugi and Sanhedrin, the mumul tiyav and mumul hachis. Tell him what we learned. Now interesting, we're going to break up the mumur. Here, instead of using the words mumul tiyav and mumul hachis, we have different categories there. If you ate treif fat, no mummer. If you schmack, you ate it. The Eza mummer. Then the Bride said, but who's a mummer? Eichel nevelis treifers kotzim v'ramasim. You eat all of these despicable items. V'shasa yayin nesach, which is avodah zarah. We'll see in a minute what the Bride is saying. You just said a minute ago that Echel chaylev is a mummer. Then you tell me something else. Now, Yehuda says also include levish climb. We're in climb. Says Gemara. Amar. Echel chaylev is a mummer. Then you say Eza mummer chaylev. My comment. What's the Bride saying? Amar Rabbi Baruch Hu Amar Yochanan Harkamar. Echel chaylev l'tiyav and yedek geschmack hadei is a mummer. Lahachis, you did it to spite. Hareza tzduki. Your apakadas, your whole different category. You are a tzduki or a min. Then the Bride continues. What about, we don't know what kind of mummer you are. How can we just tell from your actions whether you're a mummer, you're a tzduki, or you're just a mummer? If you eat something which is repugnant, why are you eating it? To show, to spite. Then you're a min or tzduki. Oichel nevela treifas kotzin masan, all means of things. Even though I was in Mexico and they're selling on all the street corners there, toasted cockroaches and all these different things. But I guess in many places it's mis. And v'shasa yain.
Treated.
Sorry,
Wasn't pre-treated.
raw. Okay. V'shasa yain nesach. If he drank yain nesach. Now yain nesach is a bit hard to understand. What's mis about yain nesach? So the taste is a b'chesh we shall learn. But Gregor Taisa says over there that yain nesach is not mis. The other ones are mis. Yain nesach is chatz avodah zarah. So that avodah zarah, that's a min. And Rabbi Yeshua, you don't even afalevish climb. Also, if you wear climb, says the Gemara, my benayu. What's going on here? What's the machlek is there? Why climb is included and the whole climb is not included? Ik benai climb the rabban. The machlek is regarding climb, which is the rabban. The machlek not the kamei for Yehuda. Marsava, talking about regular movement. Marsava, one of them says, Mederaisa, having only if you're over Yisurim in the Torah, you call the movement like Chalev and movement. And therefore, the client that we're talking about, a client which is the Rabbanan, is not included. Marsava client, even the Mefasi Suda, feel with the Rabbanan having movement. They're arguing about client the Rabbanan, which you didn't mamish blend it into the whole way. You only had a few stitches. But on the other hand, it's Mefursim. Do we treat this person as a mummer or not? If you have no shame whatsoever, even though you're not doing it in spite, whatever it's not easy, it's the right, so you said, one of them says, "Let Tayavan, you're a mumer. Lehachis, you call it Zduki. Even if you do lahachis in spite, you're a mumer. Elez it's Duki, what's Duki? Kala Oived Avodah Gecham. If you worship Avodah Zarah, that's the only time it's Duki, and Mechal Shabbos is like Oived Avodah Zarah. Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. It says, Ochel Perush Echad Yatash Echad is a mummer. If you ate of these things, these gnats, these are not very tasteful and not delicacies, and yet is a mummer. V'hachid lahachis, why else are you eating it? L'chayr lahachid, l'chayr mummer. Also, they're talking about a case. The Amar etom tamsir. I want to know what the Torah tells me not to eat.
So you choose a mosquito of all things.
And now, yeah, he wants to see what the Torah tells me not to eat. Then the Mishnah continues. Who's a Nasi? A Nasi is a king. Who's a Nasi? Without the Mishnah, you would have thought a Nasi is like Nachshon ben Aminadav, a Nasi from a Shevet. And they bring the special carbon apart. And she goes mice and all that. So you want to Mikol mitzvahs Hashem Elokov. Said that by Nasi that he didn't do a mitzvah Hashem Elokov, his Eibishter. When is his Eibishter? Everybody's Eibishter. And also furthermore, Mal said Man Yimud Lidas Hashem Elokov, and then make it show as well. Mal Hashem Elokov. All you have above you, superior to you, the Eibishter, is Nasi and above Hashem Elokov. Nasi is on top. Boy Mine Rebbe Merabchia. Rebbe once asked Rabchia a question. How do you think, am I considered a king or not? Because I'm from Shevet David HaMelech. Very strange question. He wants to know me. If I was the king, would I have to bring a carbon? We have a rule, Maida Hava Hava. Sometimes we say Droish v'Kabel Schar. You want to know the pshat and the psukim. Here, there's no pshat and the psukim, and everyone tries to wonder why is Rebbe asking Rabchia? Yeah, but it's a question. Yeah, true, but. Because even though there's original, but Al Melech, because only a Melech does it. As you'll see the Gemara's answer in a minute. What do you call it? Rebbe came. I'll tell you in a second. What was it? Rashi says over here that because if I would have been living in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, would I have to bring a soyer or not? Would I be like everybody else, or would I be a melech?
Rashi said, what
was Rashi say that? No. But who's that?
No, so here he takes it, because that's what he was. He wasn't a
No, that's not pshat at all. Who said that? The vote, that's not a vote. The vote is we had a Gemara Ksuvas. The Gemara Ksuvas says that Rebbe, I'll remind you a story there. The Gemara Ksuvas says, I don't know, are they quoting somebody? That's their own shot.
I don't
see how to do Rosh Hashanah. What's the Rosh Hashanah? We said it has to be a melech. It's the pshat like this. The Gemara Ksuvas that's how in the Samachs. On the base, tell the story there that Rebbe had his daughter, his son, to marry the daughter of Rabchia. And he prepared for the wedding and everything else, and came to the wedding. He wrote a ksuva, and right that same day, she died. So Rebbe said, what's going on here? Why wasn't I zeicha that my son should marry Rav Chia's daughter? So then Rebbe said, I come from Ben David. I'm from Ben David. I'm from the Melachim. He comes from Shimi Achi David. David Melech's brother, as a pashnish for a Ben Melech to marry someone not from the royal family. It's clear. I mean, I really don't know what he's saying. So therefore, Rebbe says, I am from the Bnei Melech, and because I am from the Bnei Melech, so therefore, I wanted. Yes, I'm asking today if I would have been there. And what's the shaila? Because at that there was also Malki based David in Babel, and so therefore, like, who is the real Melech? Who's the real Melech? That's no. Rishon is the next one. Oh, and Rebbe was the head of Eretz. You see him in. So that's what he asked Rabchia. Actually, I saw someone quote Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi has a beginning to the story. They were both standing by Levaya of Rabbi Huna, who was the Reish Gelusa of Babel, and they were burying him in Eretz Yisrael. So Rebbe turned around to Rabchia while they were waiting by the Levaya, and this prompted him to ask the question: "Nu, what do you think? It would have been and the Reish Gelusa of Babel and me and the tiny base of me. Who's the Iker?" So Rabbi Chia said to him, "You have an equal in Babel. Your rivalry." Eisvei, you might ask the question, so what's wrong? Malchis or Malchus David Elam, Mivilas, you can have both. Why can't it be a Rebbe next to Yisrael and the Rabbi Huna in Babel? So he said, no. Over there, Malki Yisrael was not in any way subservient to the Malki Yehuda. There were two independent kingdoms altogether. So therefore, they're considered like two. We, if you remember, had the meeting over there, that we are bottled to the Reish Galusik. They had much more authority. The government gave them a lot of authority, so they had much more authority. Even though we're big in Tamid Achamim. He asked the Rebbe, they're the ones who have the authority, the rod. We are the lawgivers. It says, that the Shevet, well, Shevet, that's a stick. Never Yehuda, Zeresh, Goyler, Bavel, Sheredis, Yisrael, the Makel. Who has that authority? Who got that stick? Davke Bavel. That's Hillel, Shemlamdin, Total Yisrael, Barabim. Now, from here, they want to say that when we say that he's asking, I can't remember who I saw it. I saw it somewhere. That from here we learn out that Mashiach doesn't have to. We always say Ben David. Why do you say Ben Shlomo? Because it doesn't have to be Ben Shlomo. It doesn't have to be Ben Shlomo. V'haraya Rebbe. Let's come out right here. Rebbe comes here as a melech, and he came from Shvatya. He came from one of the other sons, not from Shlomo. And yet he said, I'm the Melech. I'm the Melech. As long as you're a son from David HaMelech, I don't care where. The problem is, the Rishalmi, when we learned more we talked about it, the Rishalmi says over there that he came from the Nekevus of Rebbe, not from the Zcharim.
Malchus has been a Chaben.
So what do you do with that? So then that becomes a whole interesting thing about Yichus and so on. Anyway, back to the Gemara, the Mishnah. The Eze HaMashiach, we have a Kohen Mashiach. What's a Kohen Mashiach? HaMashuach b'Shem HaMishcha. Only those Kohen Gedolim that had anointed, remember till Yoshio, they had the Shem HaMishcha from, Loi HaMaru Begadim, and not someone just had eight Begadim after Yoshio hid the Shem HaMishcha. Any Kohen Gadol after that, if they don't have to have the whole thing of Shigyas Maisa, they don't bring a power, they're like everybody else, an ordinary carbon. Then, if a Kohen Gadol had a psul, he couldn't function, they had a replacement. A second guy came in and reserved. But as soon as the Kohen Gadol recuperated, the Kohen Gadol took back his position. So the Kohen Gadol is called the Kohen Mashiach.
So they had a
set aside someone, yeah. But Stan Yom Kippur during the year he couldn't perform whatever it was. So that person is called the Kohen Mashiach, and the Kohen, the other Kohen Gadol, who now is no longer a Kohen Gadol, is called a Kohen Sha'avar. But he still wears 8 begadim if he serves in the base of Mikdash. He's still a Kohen Gadol, but he's not functioning. He's like a state of emeritus. That's what he is, a rabbi emeritus. All covered, but no function. So the mission says we had this in Megillah. Ein ben kohen hamashuach b'shem hamishchal v'ru begadim ella. The only difference is parabol kol mitzvos, that the kohen sha'avad does not bring the power that goes on all the mitzvahs. The ein ben kohen that we did. That's the Shem HaMishcha. The ein ben kohen masham the kohen sha'avad. The kohen was deposed. Ella par yom kippurim. The par yom kippur. Who tends to that? The kohen, the serving kohen. And interesting, Taisus in Megillah there says that even when he's not serving, and the kohen sha'avar is serving, right? The kohen Meshuach got sick, he's not serving, but the kohen Meshuach, remember he had to buy the carbon with his own money. It's the main kohen Gadol's money that goes to the animal. It's his animal that's being nikriv, even though the kohen sha'avar is doing the functioning as the guy who's doing it. It's the kohen who who pays for the animal. Vasidus Eifa, and the daily says Eifa, the main Kohen Gadol does it, not the Kohen Shavar. But in every other respect, Zev is Shavim, but he's going to put him on Yom Kippur. They both can serve. Umetz, Tzuvim, Absol, they both have the same. No, but the other one's still a Kohen Gadol. He still has the mitzvah, only absolutely he can marry. And Basurim Alamon, I'll marry Almana. The Eina Matam Kravim, I'll marry Matam. No, but he's full status as a Kohen Gadol. But like paid him to let the hair grow. If if for a warning, but like paid me, they don't rip the clothes. Either one of them dies, the murderer goes back from the Urim Miklat. Tell me what we learn. We learn Shemen Hamishche She'asa Moshe b'Midbar, that the Shemen Hamishche that Moshe did in the Midbar, right? The Shemen that he made, and remember they put it in storage in the Kedesh Hakadosh, and the Shemen Hamishche was there until Yeshua came. The 5 things he hid. That's one of the things that he hid. So how did they make it? They had all these herbs, and they boiled it up within the oil, and that's how they made it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi says, how can it be? There was only 12 lugin of oil, a hin of oil, only 12 lugin, and there were so many herbs, it's impossible. How much oil would there be there? Right? Impossible. So he said, they caught him, ain't no soap, there's not enough oil there. Eloshaydin is a my first they would soak the herbs in water, so there was so much water absorbed in the herbs, there's very little space there for any oil. And then and they poured the oil on top of that. And then the koilet tzarech, so now this oil absorbs the fragrances of these herbs. And then the kapachi, you get rid of the herbs and you take away the oil. So the oil now had the beautiful fragrant smell.
Cook it in oil.
No. The first opinion says that they used to cook it in oil to get that the oil should get in it, all this thing, the herbs. Another one says it's impossible in Metzias. What's Rabbi Yehuda's response? Oh, Rabbi Yehuda, only one miracle. Let's do this work out. With 12 legin. What did they do with the 12 legin? They anointed Mishkan, Caleb, all the Kalim, Aaron, Abanav, all the Kalim, Chol Shim for 7 days in a row, and Bechulukayim, lost love it, and the entire 12 legin still was put in the Kodesh. Number 10, Shem Yizakay, Li L'Dor Seichem. There's a distance entirely, plus there's Gematria 12. All the 12 lugin were there. Tiny little more. Many miracles happened. Begin to end. Only 12. First of all, you had to store it in a barrel. We're having more babasa the whole way you make a cheshbon. When you have oil in a kankan, how much oil is lost when you sell it? You're not selling the full 10, 12 loigin, a little bit less. And then Rakama, you cut and boil them. And then you put it on top of the herbs. You lost some of the oil. It got absorbed. You couldn't take it away. And Rakama or soda boy. And then the fire itself. And Nimshich Uboy Nimshich Mishkin V'Kaleb Aaron Abanu Kosher Meluyim. Uboy Nimshich Kohen Malach forevermore. I feel a Kohen Gadol. Then Kohen Gadol Mishich, and a Kohen Gadol son needed Mishich. Just a king's son doesn't see. And so on. If you don't, a king's son doesn't have to be anointed. Why Shlomo was anointed? His brother Adonai wanted to show that he was a real king. And Yoash, his grandmother Asalia, Yochez's mother, killed all of her children. She wanted to be the queen. She was a ruthless tyrant. She killed all of her children, except Yoash was a little kid. They hid, and when he was a little bit older, whatever, they took him out, and he became king, and he killed his own grandmother. And so because of that, because Asalia was the queen, they had to anoint him. Whenever there's a machlekes, you anoint. The Yochaz, and the Yochaz because his brother Yaakov. Yaakov was older, so to show that the younger one, even though he was not entitled to it, that he should become the king. And that oil is there. It's 12. So the whole thing's full of this. And you ask me a question, how is it possible so little oil to cook the herbs? Everything else is all right. Everything else is all right. So the machlekes is if you rely on this or not. Even though we had the same machlekes in Sanhedrin, in Pesachim, when the people came to Korban Pesach in the base of Mikdash, where the doors close on their own or they physically close the doors, it's been relying on an S. But over here, it's a little bit different because over here there already were so many other nisim taking place. So the question is, can you rely on one more nest? Or do you still have to try to mitigate whatever you can? Those things you have no control over. You do whatever you have to do, and if the Abisha decides to leave the oil intact, that's his business. But what I could do is whether I should cook it, and really what I'm doing is destroying the oil, or not. And since I could mitigate it, maybe I shouldn't. That's the machlekes Do we rely on this or not? We know how do you know that? Because it says about the Kohen who is appointed Tachtov on his place, a succession plan Mibban of his children. And what do you learn from there? Name a crook who just said about Kohen Mitacht Mibban, the Kohen from one of his children underneath. My HaMashiach. Why had the word Mashiach? Kamashlan the Mibban of the Kohen Gadol. He have a Mashiach have a Kohen Gadol. The children of Kohen Gadol. That if he was appointed, anointed, he's a Kohen Gadol. But if you don't anoint him, not have a Kohen Gadol. Mashenkin and Malchus is a Yerusha, and therefore you don't have to anoint. And you know the whole Machlek is a Mashdam and everyone else. And whether by Rabbanus, we also say that's like Malchus and Yerusha, because Man Malki Rabbanon, whether it's Yerusha or not. Amama, we learned we know how you don't have to point. You know it's automatic Yerusha. Him and his family. Yerusha he lachem. It's a Yerusha, and therefore it's automatic. Position of authority. That's what's the machlekes by Chazan as well. How do you know the chiika machlekes by Mashiach? How do you know? You said the machlekes you needed to anoint. How do you know? Not you just stand in the belt. You can't just say, okay, you take over. It has to do something. I'm going to pop him across. It's possible. Who uvanav bikerev Yisrael? Bisman sheshalom Yisrael. If it's bikerev Yisrael, everyone accepts him. Okay, who uvanav? Then it's a family affair. Everybody's happy. After the beloi Mashiach. When there's a machlekes, you have to do something to settle the machlekes. So we learned Af Yehu ben Nimshi was not appointed. Yoidim was the son of Achav, and Yehu ben Nimshi was anointed for that. But Tevile Mishum the Rishon who Nimshi wasn't the king. Well, you need a reason why Yehu ben Nimshi had to be anointed. He was anointed because he wasn't the royal family. Malki based David Meshuchim, Malki so Meshuchim generally speaking, Malki Yisrael were not anointed. But no, how you know? It says in Pasuk by Shmuel told about David Melech. Sorry, so he said, go ahead and anoint David because this is him. Only Yisrael, Malki Yehuda. If he went and took oil because the machlekes with Achav was a Rasha Merusha, and his son who was just as bad, we allowed him to take oil. Some oil, you're stealing. Kidamar Papa, it wasn't from the Beis Hamikdash. It was Bafas with the Chai. It was an oil. It wasn't nothing to do with the Shem Lamishcha. We have nothing to do with that. There's a Yachid. Then you said Yachaz. Why was he anointed? Because he was younger. Mipnei Yaakov, his older brother Yaakov should have been king, and he was younger. So Yachaz was a king for 3 months, and then Yaakov became king for 11 years, and then he rebelled, and so this is first Egypt was under control. They're the ones who took care of that. And then after Yaakov, his son Yechanya took over for 3 months, and then Melech Babel appointed Tzidkiyahu to take over, and he did for 11 years until he betrayed what it called Nebuchadnezzar, and the rest is unfortunately Tisha B'av. Now, so the Gemara, if you Yaakov, you got the man who he was 2 years older. If you want to be cautious, B'nai, was Yaakov older? Well, see, there's a pasuk that says V'nei Yoshia, the children of Yoshia, Habchoir, the oldest one was Yechanan. Hasheni, the second son was Yaakov. Hashlishi, the third son, was Tzidkiyahu, and Levi, and the fourth son was Shalom. And Rabbi Yechi comes along and says, who Shalom, who Tzidkiyahu is not two different people. Tzidkiyahu had 2 names, Tzidkiyahu and Shalom. And who Yechon, who Yachas. That the first child who called Yechon is actually Yachas. That means Yachon was actually older than Yaakov. So what are you telling me that he had to be anointed because he was younger? My answer is no. Yaakov was older. So why do we say Hayachas the B'choyer? Because B'choyer Malchus, he was more worthy of being the king. Says the Gemara, me Malchus Zutim B'kam. Even so, where do you find that you appoint the younger one before the older one? But see, if it says the kingdom he gave to Yehoram ki hu abchoyer, because he was the older one. No, but it sounds like to me that the tradition was whoever's older gets the kingship. What it means is the b'chayr is that he was the most suited. He followed in his father's footsteps. He was a tzaddik. So Yoram but Yaakov was taka older than Yochaz, but he wasn't suitable to be the king. It says he had 4. It says in the Tanakh he had 4 children, and now name each one separately, and you tell me it's the same person. Hashlishi, my shlishi means shlishi lebanim. When it says shlishi, it says it when it names every one of the child. It says the first child is his, second child is his, third child is what do you call it? Is tzikio, and the fourth child is shalom. Clearly, third, fourth. So we answer third, fourth doesn't mean in number of children. It means in something else. Shlishi mishishil by the third child. He became the king fourth. Because what happened was after Yaakov, instead of going sideways, it went down to his son Yechonyah. And then when Yechonyah, after 3 months, was taken to prison to Babel, so then Nebuchadnezzar appointed his uncle Tzidkiyahu. So he was the fourth king from that family. These are this was the Seder. Yachad first 3 months, then Yaakov 11 years, then Yechonyah 3 months, and then Tzidkiyahu 11 years. Somebody learned who Shalom Tzidkiyahu. Shalom. Why is it called Shalom? He was a big tzaddik. Shalom Shalom Malchus David b'Yamav. That the Malchus David then became peaceful. Well, Mashmai, but was it now we say it's a Shlomo Ma'aser. We'll have more in the whole very interesting machlek is that what's the most important thing? The leader, the people reflect the leader, or the leader reflects the people. And the raya we bring from Tzidkiyahu, the Dur was a terrible Dur of Rishayim, but because of Tzidkiyahu, the Eibush decided to wait another 11 years in the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So he said, Mashmai Matanya Shmai. His real name was Matanya. Shenema. It says in Pasuk, Vayamlech Melech Babel is Matanya, that king of Babel made Matanya Doi, the uncle of Yechonyah, Tachta. Vayasash Meshkan, and he gave him a new name, Tzidkiyahu. Amalei, why? Ko Yatik Alech Chasadim. And that's what I just told you. The Eibush was master. You know what? I'm going to let this generation survive. B'schus Tzidkiyahu himself. Until you rebel against me, betray me. It says, he swore, but in the end he betrayed Nebuchadnezzar. Plus we had that story that he saw Nebuchadnezzar do something disgusting, and he promised he'll never tell anybody, and then he told. So, okay, we'll stop over here, and have a good Shabbos, and tomorrow 7:40.